Good morning? I guess it's morning. It
Yeah, it's fine.
feels like afternoon, but it's not. It's 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern. Fantasy football fans, we are now 8 days away from week one, at least Sunday, week one. I'm not counting the Thursday night game because I feel like, that's just a party, more of a party, less of a football game. Uh, we're back. This is the slate. If you're tuning in and checking this show out, we're here for DFS and we're a week early. So today, we're going to cover some different things, little 101, things you probably already know, maybe things you probably forgot and just need a refresher on. And if you're new to the world of DFS, welcome. We're here to help you out, and we're going to help you make a little bit of money this year. I am your host, Jeff DiMatteo, founder of Gridiron Ratings, and with me today is DFS analyst for GridironRatings.com, Kyle Carroll. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing good. Just excited actually today for some college football. It's the first big weekend, so it's finally nice to be back into football season. So, like you said, we got that Thursday teaser coming up with the Bills and the Rams game, and truthfully, I'm just excited. Like I want to watch something that I can bet on, truthfully, because once basketball was over, I have been in La La Land for the last few months, and I'm just really excited to get going again.
Well, it's also because you're a little bit of a degenerate and you're tired of betting on preseason games because that's dirty business right there.
I did it like a few games for week one, and I was like, okay, I'm just wasting my money here.
I think most people were.
Yeah, I was like, I lost like $20, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna start putting in lineups for week one. I'm gonna stop betting on these preseason games.
Yeah, that's right. Save that bankroll, put it where it matters. So,
Absolutely.
week one looks really interesting, right? And the good thing about week one is we're pretty much all on the same page, right? We've had all off season to think about everything, right? Players and lineups and movement and all this kind of garbage. So this seems like the ideal week to just smoke your wad on DFS and betting and other degenerative games. But I know part of what we wanted to talk about today was how to really assign that budget, right? Like, so how, there's a lot of schools of thought around budget, right? But I mean, let's just say somebody has $100 to spend, and we're going to use $100 as our key metric here, simply because it's easy to disseminate. You can extrapolate it up or reduce it down, and it's easy to figure out, right? If you have $100 to play, what percentage of that are you really putting into week one?
Yeah, so I think it depends on, is it $100 weekly? Is it $100, if you get paid bi-weekly and you're like, look, I have $100 to last me 2 weeks, that's where you really want to dictate to. So when you're looking at, for DraftKings specifically, when you're looking at DFS strategy, it's okay, how much my bankroll am I going to spend? And at the same time, how big is the contest, right? Because you may have $100 and you're like, hey, I'm going to spend, 60% of it this week to have a little bit left over for next week. But if you're going into these big lineups like the Millie Maker for week one and you spend $60, that's only a handful of lineups. You're talking, $12 or 12 lineups for $60. And the chances of you actually making a significant amount of money in a contest that allows for 150 entries per account, your hit rate's going to be very, very minimal. And even if you do hit a couple of lineups, you're probably not even going to really break even. So the first thing, we're going to talk about, and we talked about a little bit today, is if you're starting with $100 and you want to go, you want to get deep in there, right? You want to go 60%, which is totally fine because you'll most likely make some of it back. Let's look at some of the contest types that we have. So if you say, okay, $60, I want my minimum entry fee to be 25 cents. I want my maximum entry fee to be, you can even say $5. And you can customize your contest types based on the amount of money and the amount of entries. So if you want to go multi-level entry and you want no more than people to have 10 entries, right? You think you consume content, you think DFS, I want minimum entries to try to maximize my value, and you can filter these in. For week one right here, we have a $5 NFL 1.5 million King of the Beach qualifier, right? Like, you're going to find some things to like win some money or qualify you for the bigger satellites. So that's kind of like, what we want to discuss. I want to get your opinion on it. Would you rather do some of these lineups that allow money and qualifiers, or do you think for yourself, I just want to try to win first place for the big prize money.
Well, and I think that's what it always comes down to, right? So I know for me, I'm just about profitability. And I think you have to always determine what's your appetite for risk, right? So
Absolutely.
if you're going to say, if I have $100 and I'm looking at week 1 and I'm going to say, okay, well, I have $100 budget that I'm going to play, for the next 2 weeks, for example, I'm probably going to play 40% of it in week 1. And I'm going to keep the other 60% on hand for week 2 when I've collected some more information about how teams are playing. But it's one of those situations where it's, how do you want to mix it up? I think the diversity you mentioned is a really good point, where you can play some of the 25-cent games, some of the $3 games. Excuse me, I have a excuse me,
Bless.
little sneeze there. Thank you. I may have another one coming, so I apologize in advance. But when you have some of that diversification going on, one of my key tenets is, if you can't max enter, like if there's a limit to how many entries you can have in a game, then you shouldn't be in that game. The idea is that if you want to go in and you want to make an impact, and you want to really be profitable, even if it's a 25-cent game that has a 20 entry max or 100 entry max, whatever it is, go in and max enter that thing, because most of the field isn't going to max enter. So it already gives you a defined advantage just in sheer numbers, right, over the rest of the field. Then you can come back around and you start to build out all your lineups, right? And no one wants to hand build 100 lineups. So find yourself a good optimizer, pick out a handful of players. There's some really great player pool options that are out there. I know Jordan Vanek over at 33rd Team, great friend of mine, love the guy to death. He does some killer stuff with his player pools. I actually refer to it quite a bit when I'm building my own pools. And I actually cross-reference his against mine, and I try to see where the similarities are. And those are the players I typically run with every week. So shout out to Jordan and 33rd Team. But, when I look at, how are we going to go about doing it? I like to pick a handful of those players, and then go on 4for4 or Stochastic, or, one of these other sites that has an optimizer, and let the optimizer do the work. Don't build 100 lineups by hand, because then what you've done now is you've given yourself some diversification. You let the machine do the thinking too, and it's going to give you a different bit of leverage on the field. That week where you wouldn't have played Randall Cobb on your own, but the machine kicked out Randall Cobb, and he happens to get 2 touchdowns. Well, guess what? You just got 2 touchdowns that, the 85% of the field, 90% of the field didn't get. And that gives you another defined advantage. So max enter. And when you're max entering, don't be afraid to use, an optimizer. Sign up for one if you're into it. There's some really great options out there. But I think that's a really good point when it comes to budgeting, trying to figure out kind of like which contests to get into. But
absolutely,
when it comes to max entering, the Millie Maker is only $5 this, week 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but 150 entry max, it's a $650 or so, total investment there. So you've got to be ready to throw down some coin week 1, and you don't want to smoke your whole wad week 1, right? Like, how much money do you want to have in your bankroll, or at least available budget for DFS? If you're going to spend $650 just on the Millie Maker, how much money do you want to have set aside for weeks 2 through 4? Like if it were you in your strategy.
Yeah. So my strategy is number 1 is to just win the $1 million, which I think, I think that's everybody's strategy. So when that doesn't work, and
everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. Okay, Kyle, that's
So I think the good thing is, it's all about expectation, right? Like,
sure.
I know currently I have 78 lineups in the Millie Maker. So, and I know I'm probably going to hit at least 100. I'm going to be very close to max budgeting. So what I think the expectation is for yourself is, I'm going to win some of this money back. Maybe if I put in, if I'm looking at 100% of my DFS, I'm probably going to win at least 30 to 40%. If I've done my research, if I feel like I'm locked in for week 1, which we've talked about, we had a lot of time to lock into week 1. And my mindset is always changing. I'm always learning new information. I'm always optimizing my lineups. So if I'm putting in a full $750 for week 1 at a max reg, at that caliber, I probably want that to be that 40 to 60% of my budget, right? So if you're looking at $750 for week 1, you should be somewhere around a $1,500 bankroll is probably what you're going to be looking at. And some people do have that. Now, if you're talking about yourself from earlier, if you want to go into the smaller ones, I decided to optimize some of the applications in for DraftKings for week 1 for $1, max 20 entries. So for $20, you can do the NFL 250K first down. 20 entries. I can create 20 entries in my sleep, especially with the player pools that we've put together. And you're like, oh, well, it's $1. Like, that's not going to be very much money. If you go into the actual contest itself, first place, right at the very top, is $20K for $1. So for $20, you have your chance to, whatever, how many zeros you want to carry on that for your bankroll. And for $20, you're only spending 20% of your budget for week 1 if it is $100. So then you can get into some of these single entry, maybe a $25 single entry, where if you think you have a lineup that is going to at least cash and has the potential to win, and you're only spending 45% of your budget for week 1, that's going to allow you for long-term success over the course of an entire season. Because again, you only need to win one decent lineup where you're putting in for $1 and you win $250, and you're just hoping to bankroll that for the rest of your season, right?
Sure.
And you'll gradually increase your contest. Probably you'll increase your budget for your contest. So if you come out of week 1 with $300, 40% of that, you're still looking at $120, $150, and so you've already increased your bankroll for the year to put yourself in a position to win more money.
Well, something you said there kind of struck a chord with me. You mentioned the single entry games, and I think a lot of people avoid those because I think a lot of folks are kind of like me, where they like the shotgun lineups out there.
And I'm
and it's like, for me, it's a numbers game, right? I like to get as many lineups into a game as humanly possible, and then just increase my odds of winning, right? If you're going to play the Powerball, you have a better odds of winning if you have 500 tickets in than one ticket. So if you're going to go big. So single entry just never really seems to resonate with me. And maybe it's because I just don't have the confidence in any one lineup of saying, yep, that's the one. It's going to go win. But how frequently do you play single entry? Are you into those quite a bit?
So if we're talking the $100 budget, which we just discussed, if you're doing, let's say 40%, you want to be conservative, you want to have money for weeks 2, 3, and 4. You don't want to have to keep putting money into these accounts. If you're doing 20% into a multi-entry contest, then I'll probably do about 10% of that 40% into a single entry. Because when you start creating these lineups, you start optimizing in your own brain. And, if you have a spreadsheet or something, there is a lineup that I have a very good chance of at least min cashing, because after you do so many, you're like, okay, like I kind of like justify these players, and the player pool is smaller. And so like, kind of like you've talked about, you like the multi-entry ones, but how much easier is it against other people that it's one entry, right? Everyone thinks I can create one good lineup. And if their one good lineup isn't as good as yours, you've already got yourself an edge over the player field. So I'd probably say about of your 40 to 60%, 10%, one or two lineups, a $10 entry. If you do a $10 entry here, which I just pulled up for week 1, there is a $12 NFL 50K fair catch. It's a single entry, 4,900 lineups. So you've already shrunk this player pool from, hey, look, the Millie Maker has 1.1 million entries all the way down to this one. And for $12, first place is $5,000. But to min cash, all you have to do is get 1,000th place. So, you're looking at 20%. And so if you can find one lineup that you really like to at least win double your money for $25, you're in for 12, out for 25. I think there's an opportunity to at least, put yourself in a position to better yourself on these single entry games. But again, I'm talking 10% of your 40% budget. So 1 to 2 entries versus, 20 to 30 that you're putting in. I think to diversify, right? Like, sometimes you have those weeks, and I'm sure you've done it, where you've created all these lineups, but there's one that you really like, and you're like, man, if I'd have taken that lineup and put it in like a single play, I would have quadrupled my money, because you've created a lineup that you actually like, and that's how. And I'm sure you the same way. I build one lineup and kind of build variations off of that for a little bit, and then I'll start building other lineups.
Yeah, I think the variation thing, it depends for me. So it's like, if there's got to be a matchup that I really like, and there's a lot of different players available.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I've got a quarterback that I feel like is a lock at 300 yards passing, so I get that quarterback bonus on the 300 yards. Take Justin Herbert for week 1, for example, and I want to stack him. Like, maybe I want to stack him with Keenan Allen in one lineup, Mike Williams in a different one, Josh Palmer in a different one, or maybe I want a double stack, right? Give me Palmer and Allen, Palmer and Williams, so I can go ahead and get some other players in his lineup. Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's something to that. I tend to lean on the optimizers a little bit, and because I'll do like, last year my big thing was the $3 game. I would pop into those $3 games, 20 entry maximum, and then, and I'd walk out of there. I spent $60, but I'd walk out, maybe I'd win $100 one week, a couple $100 the next week. Maybe I'd break even, and it would be kind of a little up and down, but on the year I was up, a few grand when it was said and done. And so it was just a matter of, kind of the long road. It's like everyone I think plays DFS. A lot of folks get into it thinking, "Hey, I'm going to go win $1 million." Good luck. You have your odds of putting in one lineup and winning $1 million on DraftKings is almost on par with getting struck by lightning while winning the Powerball. Like it's the odds of that are so infinitesimally small. Because the thing you have to remember is that the lineup you have that you love that has all those stud guys you've been thinking about all year, guess what? Everybody else has those same stud guys. If you're getting 28 points out of CMC or Jonathan Taylor in week 1, how many other guys do you think managed to get that guy in their lineup? You didn't diversify.
40 to 50%, probably.
Right. Well, yeah, you weren't able to separate yourself at all. So that when you're getting into some of these bigger games, this is kind of where we kind of pivot out of, okay, we talked about budget and some of these contests, but it's important. Remember, you got to diversify the guys in your lineup, not just the games you're playing. You got to find those one-offs, that guy that no one else is playing. You got to get that low ownership guy, or, maybe it's you hit the right defense. You start getting some of those pieces in play, and now you're going to separate yourself from the field, right? So as you're playing, even the $3 game, it's like, okay, well, everyone loves Justin Herbert, right? Everyone's going to be all over that game. Everyone's going to be all over Patrick Mahomes. Where's that quarterback that you can set up, that you can stack up that might hit 300 yards, right? Where's that receiver that's going to get you 100? The running back that's going to rush for 100? Where are the touchdowns hiding? I think that's where we start to break down the individual games. And I know for me, and I think you do the same thing, is I like to go and check out the Vegas spreads. I like to check out the lines and say, all right, well, who's got the highest over-unders? The highest over-under games, they're the ones I want to start with. If you've got games that are, 51, 52, 53, and they're the highest over-unders for the week, I like to start there, see what we look like, right? And then I go ahead and I take the next step is I like to see what the spread is, so I can come up with an implied total. The implied total for the game is simply what Vegas is telling us based on the over-under and the spread, and it's saying, okay, well, the over-under might be 48 on this game, but there's a 7.5 point spread. The 49ers are going to stomp out the Bears in week 1. It's implying that the 49ers are going to score 28 or more points. That's 4 touchdowns. Who's getting those touchdowns for the 49ers, right? Like, let's find those guys. And I think you do kind of the same thing, right? Is that kind of part of your process where you start with the individual games?
Yeah. And so that was something I spent a lot of the offseason looking over is like, hey, how much it's easy to start with quarterback. How many of these quarterbacks were in high over-under games for week 1 last year? And the more you dug into it, the more it was like on like 2 to 3 of the top 5 quarterbacks every single week were in a top 5 over-under game that Vegas had projected. And you look at week 1 last year, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Jameis Winston, Tom Brady. Those were 4 of your top 5 quarterbacks last year. And all those 4 guys were in a top 5 projected over-under based off of Vegas's projection. And so when you start looking at the data, on average, at least 3, sometimes 4 of the quarterbacks were in a top 5 over-under. So we've already talked about, shrinking that player pool, right? Like you take out the Thursday, the Sunday, and the Monday game, that's still 13 games. That's a lot of players. That's 26 quarterbacks. How am I supposed to, go through 26 quarterbacks and figure out which ones I actually want to play with? So that's what we've talked about is shrinking this player pool. And we use the Vegas lines to help dictate that, because at the end of the day, Vegas is going to win their money, right? Like Vegas. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why, Vegas is profitable every single year. And even in sports betting, not just, their casino games, it's because they have their algorithm. They've done the research. They know, hey, more often than not, we're going to win on these things. And So that's
They
something
may
we like
lose
to
some
do.
battles, but they always win the war.
Oh, always, right? Like, how many people do you know outside of like truly the 1% professional gamblers that's like, oh yeah, I go to Vegas and I win every single time? No. Over the lifetime of a run, unless you win a one-off, you win $1 million, chances are you're gonna be, at worst a 55% hit rate. And that's still good, right? Like that means you're gonna win some, you're gonna lose some, but you're gonna win more often than not.
If I'm winning
And so
55% of the time, I feel really good about that because I'm hyper
yeah.
profitable at that point.
I do too.
I mean, that's the funny thing in DFS. You're going to hear from a million people, and everyone's got the magic sauce, the secret player, this and that, the big sleeper. Oh, you got to have this guy. Guess what? Everybody else has got that guy too.
Mhm.
And
Who was
really,
the last year, the week one that Marquez Callaway, right?
yeah,
Big camp hype. And I don't know if you remember, but you shared a statistic with me from last year's week one DFS plays. He was like priced at 3,800. He was this, this deep sleeper that he was going to break out for week one. The Packers game was in a high over under. It was a top 5 over under, which is why Jameis Winston finished up there. And I think he was like, 48 or 40, some astronomical. And he was top 5 in ownership for week one in DFS. And he did nothing.
yeah.
So
It crippled a lot of people really quickly. And so that's where, you should always take whatever you're hearing from, whether it's us or anybody else, and you should start to cross it with other reference points, right? Some of the guys I trust, obviously I mentioned Jordan Vanek over at 33rd team. I trust him, I would hand him my bankroll and let him set my lineups. That's how much I trust him. The guys over at Stochastic, they're phenomenal. They have a great record, but start to take different tidbits from different places and build your own strategy and figure out what works for you, because your budget and your lineups and the players you want to cheer for are going to be a little bit different than what I want to do, what Kyle wants to do, and what 10 other people want to do. So all things to keep in mind, but we're just trying to give you the pointers to kind of get you going, right? So Vegas lines, super important. Figure out the implied total, super important. Kyle, we talked a little bit about budgeting. We talked a little bit about choosing some contests, a little bit about the Vegas over-unders. What are we missing here on some of the 101s?
Yeah, I think it comes down, I think, to, at the end of the day, player criteria, right? Like, what is the criteria on each position that you think, or that we've done the research on, that is going to give you the highest odds, right? So in fantasy football and DFS, I love playing like poker, like Texas Hold'em. And in that, they talk about variance, right? Like, you need to embrace the variance. More often than not, if you make the correct play, you're going to win over the long term. And I think that's something we really need to apply in DFS. Look, I'm going to give you some statistics. And if it's over 50%, that means more often than not, we talked about 55% earlier. If you're a 55% hit rate, more often than not, you're making the right play versus not making the right play. Over the long
Process
run,
is good.
It will pay off. Yes. And so that's something we've tried to do with these players. What criteria hits more often than not? And so something we've talked about with running backs. And for the running back criteria, what we've noticed and what I've noticed is if you are scoring at least 2 touchdowns or you get 6 targets and a touchdown, you're almost locked in to be top 5. The only player for week one last year that didn't hit that criteria was Joe Mixon. He had 127 rushing yards and a touchdown and 4 targets for 23 receiving yards.
Now, here's the question, though. Like, those are big numbers. 6 targets
Those are
for a
big
running
numbers.
back, 2 touchdowns. Like that's pretty big, right? Like, I'm imagining people listening to this being like, "Well, yeah, no shit, Kyle."
Well, absolutely, right. But but with that, you can help.
How do we find that guy?
Yeah, with that, you can help dictate. And so we have to shrink that player pool. And so when you start shrinking the player pool, you put players up. Your week one last year, CMC, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Nick Chubb. All those guys were able to hit this criteria, or 3 of the 4 were, but they all have the same sort of play that helps them. Mixing my words here. Let's break it down for week one, right? Who are some players that you think hit this criteria that can hit that 6 target and 1, and really it's the 6 target and 1 touchdown mark, because there's a lot of them, right? But when you start breaking it down based off player pool, there's really not a lot. You think, oh, anyone can go out and see 6 targets, but if you look at the top receiving running backs for every week, there's really not that much.
I'm thinking like McCaffrey, Eckler, end of list.
Well, so
like those are two guys I really liked for a touchdown and 6 targets.
Yeah, and so, but for me, that list I think extends a little bit more. Some guy that I really like is Aaron Jones.
Oh,
He's
shit, that's a good one. Okay.
he's easily going to hit that 6 target, and they're going to be they're projected in a high over under. They're missing offensive pieces with Devontae Adams out. I think there is
By out we mean traded.
They're traded. Yeah, I meant out of Green Bay. So you look at a guy like Aaron Jones, right? 6 targets and a touchdown, easy marker for him to hit.
Sure.
Travis Etienne, he's going to be the pass catching back there. 6 targets and a touchdown, easy marker for that.
He's cheap this week too, right? He's cheap.
He is, and you can even do Saquon Barkley, kind of avoiding him a little bit. He's going to be really chalk. He's priced at 6,100. But there are running backs when you really start to break it down that it just gives you the highest probability of hitting for those week 1. And so that's why you want to start breaking these down to, 2 touchdowns. Are you ever going to see someone, let's say like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? Like, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire ever going to hit like 2 rushing touchdowns? No, probably not. But 6 targets and a touchdown? Yeah, I could see that in his range of outcomes. Absolutely. Like there's players
in a
here
game against the Cardinals where they've got a high over under
against
too,
the Cardinals
right?
against a high over under. And so when you start shrinking this player pool, you got to start going against players that you can start weeding out a little bit. And so when you're looking at week 1 here, I'll pull up some of these running backs here for you that you can easily take out of your player pool and you can move on. And this will help when you're building your lineups. So you're looking at someone like, let's see.
Don't spoil next week's show. We're actually talking about
right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just to build it. So someone like Josh Jacobs, right? Like you get guys like Josh Jacobs, Alexander Madison, David Montgomery, like some of these players, like you're not going to be able to predict 6 targets and a touchdown or that 2 touchdown threshold. And so when we start going through these sort of players here, that's where you're able to, decipher like, okay, I can put these players in my lineup at this certain price.
Got it. Okay. So obviously, hey, the 6 targets, looking for a touchdown, like those are good markers for a running back. But I mean, quarterbacks, we know, hey, look, we want a 300-yard passer or we want a guy who's running it a lot, right? That's kind of the gist of it. Cool. Let's skip quarterback then. What about wide receivers? Like, how do we start to disseminate, what's going on at the top? Because I think a lot of people are going to obviously want Justin Jefferson in week 1 because they couldn't get him in their fantasy draft, right? But then you've got a lot of really well-priced guys in that $5,000 to $6,000 range. A lot of names that popped up in there were like, Brandon Ayuk, Amon-Ra, Michael Pittman's a really nice one. Elijah Moore is in that group. What's going on down there? Like, should we be leveraging these lower cost receivers and then paying up in week 1 at running back for your Aaron Jones, maybe a Christian McCaffrey?
Yeah, and I think absolutely you should. I think the criteria for wide receivers is of the top 8, at least 2 to 5 are going to be linked into a top 5 quarterback. Right. So when you start breaking down quarterbacks and high over-unders, you're able to take, okay, let's look at last year. Patrick Mahomes, he was in a high over-under. Tyreek Hill finished as the number 2 wide receiver. Okay, well, let's go to week 2. Let's try some more players. Lamar Jackson, Hollywood Brown, Kyler Murray, Rondale Moore, and so Tom Brady and Mike Evans. And so when you start breaking these down, you want to be able to attach those quarterback to those wide receivers and try to get that stack into your lineup. And I think one other thing that we're starting to notice is if you see a wide receiver that is kind of ascending into that alpha wide receiver 1 role, those are the guys you're going to want to put into your lineups. Elijah Moore, like you mentioned, someone we expect to take a big step forward, especially with Joe Flacco, who hyper-targeted him last year whenever Elijah Moore was hyper-targeted with like Mike White last year. He showed if he gets the targets, he's going to be golden. And so we like Joe Flacco a little more for week 1 versus Zach Wilson. And then a big one, I think, for this year is going to be Michael Pittman. Like, he's going to be that guy he's going very high in fantasy drafts. He's someone that is going to show that last year he is capable of being a top, 10, 15 wide receiver in this league. And so when you're projecting that step forward, those are the kind of guys you want to target.
Yeah, and Pittman's got a plus matchup against the Texans. It'll be interesting to see how he plays against the rookie Derek Stingley there. I'm a big fan of targeting rookie corners early on. I love Stingley's profile, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So You mentioned Elijah Moore, and this is totally off topic, but I have him just like he's so much like a young Antonio Brown to me that it hurts. And I don't know that he's going to have that ceiling where he's getting 120 catches and all that, but that's a player that he's silky smooth in the intermediate space. And if they are targeting him, yeah, you got to have him in your lineup, especially right now where he's cheap. You're talking, sub $6,000 player. Like if you're taking Elijah Moore versus taking a guy who's $7,000 or more over here at wide receiver, like that's like $2,000 more dollars you can go spend in another spot, like running back and go get some of these studs before they get hurt because, well, running back attrition's real. All right, cool. So let's move on to tight end. So tight end, probably more of the same, kind of just like wide receiver, right? Kind of looking at the same stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it is linked up to a top 5 quarterback as well. But it really just comes down to touchdowns. Truthfully, the tight end position is so hard to try to project, just because if you catch a touchdown, you're pretty much locked into like top 10 regardless, top 8.
Right.
And something that now that we're talking about it, I should just go see on average how many tight ends actually catch a touchdown on a weekly basis.
I have a sneaking suspicion that when you do that, you're going to find running back performance jives with tight end performance also. So you find teams that it's like, okay, hey, cool. This team had, I look at the 49ers are a great example, right? George Kittle went nuts. Oh, so did Eli Mitchell. And so there's probably going to be some correlation there too, because teams that love the tight end also like to run the ball. But yeah, I mean, really week 1, hey man, where are the high over under games? We got Kelsey. Hard to pass on Kelsey. You got Mandrews. It's only he and Bateman. There's no one else catching balls in Baltimore. So it's hard to pass on it, but you're paying up for those guys. So we've got a couple of guys, and we'll talk about them more next week, but we've got a couple of surprises, I think, at tight end that will be in our player pool. But let's jump on. I know we're getting low on time here. We had talked about trying to keep this thing to about 30 to 40 minutes here. Defense is a absolute freaking disaster, right? Like, how do we go about picking the right defense? Because that can really make or break a lineup.
Yeah, I think using those Vegas over-unders and those projected totals for teams is the way to go. And so we have a couple here, and we won't discuss it too much today. Save that for next week. But one team that we kind of talked about is the Saints, right? Like the Saints, it's almost like the inverse, right? Vegas has this as the lowest, tied to the lowest over-under of the week. The Falcons are only projected to score 15 points, so 2 touchdowns. And your neutral game script is 21 to 27 points allowed for defense. So anything that you project over 4 touchdowns, you want to stay away from that game, even if you do project there to be a lot of like touchdown or like interceptions and such, because you want to have that inverse of those lower point totals, because that's where your bread and butter is going to be. And so when you cross-examine that with the pricing, some team that we kind of like is the Dolphins for week 1, because the low projected over-under, so we shouldn't hit that threshold. And then just 1 or 2 turnover is really what you're going to be looking at. And you want to be able to kind of save your money on your defense a little bit if you can find a value in that position.
Cool. I can dig that. So we shot through some positions, kind of how to look for some different players. We went through, how to assess what games to even target. We talked a little bit about contests, a little bit about setting a budget and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that we're missing on just a 101 level, just to kind of like, refresh people and get them back into the DraftKings mode of thinking here?
I think at the end of the day, you need to understand that you're gonna win, have some decent lineups. You're gonna win some, and you're gonna lose some. And so when I talked about earlier about embracing that variance, at the end of the day, we're doing this for fun, right? Like you want to win some money, but you got to do this for fun. And so
I'm trying to get paid, Kyle.
We're all trying to get paid, but like it's all for fun, right? And so I think the biggest thing I can tell you is don't tilt, another poker term. But if you're having a bad week, if you misread like a situation that you thought was going to be a good situation, don't tilt that and kind of force yourself into, oh man, like my lineup's missed on the Sunday slate. I'm going to dump all my money into Sunday night captain, showdown mode and try to win my money back. Like, don't put yourself in that situation. Trust your process, trust the process of the people. This dang fly keeps bothering me. Trust.
I thought this was some kind of weird, like,
yeah, I was like, no,
I didn't know it. Okay,
coming in.
It's like
Trust
baseball.
the process of the content that you consume, and know that over the long term, you and I and these other people and creators, we're going to try to put you in the position to win money over the long run. So
Sure.
don't tilt, just embrace the variance, because one week where maybe you didn't really pay attention to the episodes this week and you end up winning some money, that's just how it's going to be. Like, you just have to embrace that.
Cool. Well, I guess the last thing I'll give everybody here is gridironratings.com. We just went through a major site overhaul. I should say we're going through a major site overhaul. We're actually updating and replacing all of our pages. So there's very minimal content right now. But one of the things you can find is if you hop on gridironratings.com right now and you scroll down, there's some DFS images right there where we go through some different stacks that are available. And you can look at different teams and different stacks and like the cost structure on them. Feel free to dig into that. We're going to be updating those over the course of the next week too. We're going to be adding a few more teams, maybe adjusting a couple of stacks as we've seen some things change in some of the lines. And, we have some different players that we go from like to love and love to like. And we're obviously always tinkering with our player pool throughout the week. But take a look, use it as a primer, and then let's get together next week, Saturday. Let's try, 11 a.m. Eastern again, and let's go through and find some cool stacks. We'll kind of give you a little bit of the different sections of your lineup to build out. Hey, let's start with the Charger stack. Hey, if you're going to make that stack work here, here's some low cost options at other positions so that you can go ahead and put yourself in a great position to be profitable moving forward. I'm not going to sit here and promise you $1 million win. But the one thing that we're going to do is we're going to give you all the tools you need to make a profit in 2022. Okay. It is a marathon, not a sprint. So let's get out there. Let's assess that budget, get it in place so you know what you want to play. And the next weekend, let's get these lineups really set in, locked in, and get ready to crush 2022.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great plan to me.
Cool. So Kyle, anything else you're working on or anything you want to share with the group before we turn it off today?
No. I will, since we won't be here until Saturday of next week, I'll be putting some stuff out on the Twitter and Gridiron's page for the Thursday night showdown lineups. We've got Bills-Rams, got a big game. People are going to be itching to put some money in. So I'm going to have one or two lineups that will be suggestions to kind of scratch that itch for you until you make it to the Sunday slate.
I've got 2 words for that game. Allen Robinson.
You love Allen Robinson, don't you?
I love Allen Robinson with Stafford. I just, because Trey White's not playing, right?
Yeah, I don't think he's playing.
So he's not playing. They got to do something about Cooper Kupp. You can't just man up Cooper Kupp, but you can't double everybody. And if you're telling me a guy like Allen Robinson's going to be seeing, B-level coverage, and you're going to let Matt Stafford toss it all over the yard, because that running game isn't anything to get excited about. Yeah. I just feel like Allen Robinson is just the lock, stock. It's going to be the hyper chalk play. But just injected into my veins. I want it anyway.
No. Somebody's breaking up here a little bit. There we go.
It's me. Sorry, we've got some storms going on here, so my network's been going in and out a little bit. But anyway, with that, I think that's a wrap. So for Kyle Carroll, I'm Jeff DiMatteo. Come back and see us next week. Let's go ahead and talk about all things lineups, DFS, and DraftKings. But until then, good luck, and I need like is it like
you need to work on a phrase.
I need a good phrase. Well, I want something to let people know to be profitable, and I just didn't have anything. I'm like, let's like get money or something. I don't know.
Let's make some money.
Let's make some money. That's a really shitty outro. Sorry guys, I'll work on it.
We'll figure it out.
See you guys.